I was a cadet there in 1978-79.
I'd like to think so. Why? What did you do to it?
Oh dear. I seem to remember there's some good curry houses there, though. I think run by ex-Gurkhas.
Fantastic. I should try and seek a couple out next week.
Yeah. Yeah. Look for if you look for Nepalese restaurants, they'll be
ex-Gurkhas.
Yeah.
Excellent. I shall look forward to that. Thanks for the tip, Hugh. I'll hop off.
All right then. See you later.
Cheers.
If you may find your girl.
Good morning, everyone. The time is now 9:30 and the inquiry is resumed. This inquiry relates to the appeal made against the decision of Charnwood Borough Council to refuse an application for up to 170 dwellings at land to the east of Cossington Road in Sileby. This is day 3 of the inquiry, and we'll run through some housekeeping matters and procedural points first. Please ensure mobile phones and other devices are switched to silent, please, if not in use for this event. Unless you're speaking, if you could switch off your microphone and video, please. And obviously keep the video on if you're participating in sessions today. There will be 2 sessions before lunch, so we'll have a break at about 1 o'clock for lunch, and we'll have a late morning break at about 11. And then we'll have a session after lunch. Each session will take about 90 minutes or thereabouts. So we'll aim to finish today around 3:30. On previous days, I've heard from interested parties, as well as held question and answer sessions on highways, flooding and ecology matters, and also I've held roundtable discussions on education matters, as well as obligations and conditions. Today, we will hear the evidence of the Council's landscape witness, Mr. Higson. But before we do that, just a few things to check and run through. Are there any interested parties who wish to speak who haven't already done so or indicated that they wish to do so? I've not been made aware, but please let me know if that is the case. In terms of documents, I've received a few documents since Wednesday session. I've had a court judgment regarding the doctor's surgery case in Buckinghamshire, which I'm happy to add as inquiry document 6. Then I've also received an updated verified views diagrams from the appellant to reflect the Environment Agency condition on finished floor levels. No doubt we'll look at that today and also on the next day of the inquiry. Just to say in broad terms, and Mr. Tucker might be able to help here, the difference is it's slightly higher than before. I was trying to do a kind of comparison on my screen between the 2.
Yeah, it's almost impossible to see the difference unless you zoom in. But yes, it's very slightly higher. I think 60 mil is the difference. But I can get the exact figure behind the scenes, sir.
I think 60 centimetres rather than
60 centimetres. I'm sorry, 60 centimetres.
600 mil.
600 mil.
Yeah, 60 centimetres. Okay, thank you. So I'm happy to add that as inquiry document 7. And then I've also received an updated list of conditions from the parties. Thank you for that. I'm happy with all the changes. The only thing I spotted was a duplicate condition. Numbers 13 and 14 are identical, so one of those can be removed. And then in terms of condition 5 and a parameters plan, as I've indicated in the email, that I'm happy to take a look at a parameters plan and then consider whether or not it should be tied to a condition. So I think once I have sight of that, we can discuss. I assume that's going to be forthcoming, Mr. Tucker.
It's under preparation, sir. Yes. Okay,
fine. That's great. So I'm happy for the updated list of conditions to go on as ID8 to the website and list. And then one other thing I've received is I've had train timings for Sileby to Higson. Thank you for that. We can discuss later on before we adjourn today. Exact arrangements for the site visit, and obviously the train travel I'm intending to do on my own anyway, but we can discuss timings later unless there's anything to say now.
Do you want that as an inquiry document, sir? Or
I think it's probably not necessary. I think it's sort of I think it's fine. I think I'm happy.
That's fine. No, I just wanted to double check because we're obviously keeping a running list.
Of course, no, I think it's fine. I'm happy not to have that as an inquiry document. Thank you. I don't think there's anything else that I was expecting for today at least. So unless there's anything else, Mr. Richards.
Yeah, there's just one other thing, sir. You know that also behind the scenes we're working on identifying the outdoor sports provision projects that the 106 might make reference to.
Okay.
There's a slight hold up in that because the officer we need to talk to at the council is not in at the moment and won't be back until Monday. So it's in hand, but it's just not happening as quickly as we once hoped.
That's fine. I wasn't necessarily expecting something by today anyway, but I'm glad to know it's in hand. Thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you for the list of documents for Mr. Higson today. I've obviously got that and have various PDFs lined up. We'll go through those.
Yeah.
Thank you. Anything else from the council, Mr. Richards, before we get going?
No, I'll just double check that the YouTube is working, if you like, or perhaps somebody on my team could do so and then just confirm that we're switched on. Well, it's probably easier for me to just look on my. Oh, it's working fine. I just had a WhatsApp message.
Okay, great. Good to know. Thank you. So thanks, Mr. Richards. And anything from the appellant, Mr. Tucker?
No, sir. As my learner friend knows, behind the scenes, we're very reliant upon the YouTube working. I think Mr. Cook has logged on to watch, but certainly his level of concentration is such that he will need to watch again in terms of that. So we are reliant upon that working behind the scenes. So I'm very grateful. So if there's a problem in terms of it dropping out, please let any of us know. To my learner friend. And in addition, unfortunately, my junior has also gone down with COVID. So we've now got two people who are reliant upon the videos. So as my learner friend knows behind the scenes, that's particularly important today.
Okay, well, thank you for letting me know. I hope both Mr. Cook and Ms. Bell are able to feel better soon.
So do I.
Of course. Thank you, Mr. Tucker. Okay, well, if there are no other procedural points from anyone, any queries, then I'm happy for us to begin with the council's landscape witness, Mr. Higson. So my intention is we'll hear evidence in chief and then make a start with cross-examination before the first break. So, Mr. Richards, when you're ready, would you like to introduce your witness, please? Yes,
thank you very much, Mr. Higson. If you just like to put your camera on. Yeah. Excellent. And just dealing with some administrative matters first, can I just confirm that you have been removed from the council's inquiry team WhatsApp group?
Yep.
And we will make sure that he is removed until he's answered the very last question that anybody might have of him. And Mr. Higson, that you're physically on your own and separate in a different building from other members of the inquiry team.
Yep, I can confirm that. Yeah, I'm at home.
Fine. Good. Okay. Well, to introduce you from your main proof of evidence. You're Simon Higson, you're a Director of Landscape and Ecology with Heaton Planning Limited.
Yep.
You're a Chartered Landscape Architect and Chartered Horticulturalist with over 20 years of professional experience.
Yep.
You have a BA Honours degree in Landscape Architecture from Cheltenham and Gloucester College of Higher Education and a Master's degree in Landscape Architecture from Leeds Metropolitan University.
Yes, that's correct.
You've experience of acting as a landscape expert witness.
Yep.
And that your proof contains the declaration that the evidence you give is true and has been prepared and given with the guidance of the Landscape Institute.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Good. And you haven't got a summary proof of evidence because your proof of evidence is short with the guts of your assessment in the Appendix 1 Landscape and Visual Impact Assessment that you've produced.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And you've also reached agreement with Mr. Cook on a landscape statement of common ground, which sets out in effect the heads of terms where you and he remain in disagreement.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Can we start then by looking at the area of local separation?
Yeah.
We're familiar where that is, but if we go to core document 6.01, which is the local plan, and to page 109 in that document, which is page 116 of the PDF.
Yeah.
We can see, I hope, policy CT4.
Yeah.
And what does policy CT4 tell us that you want particularly to draw to the attention of the inspector?
Yeah, so in areas of local separation, development acceptable in principle will only be permitted where the location, scale and design of development would ensure that the predominantly open and undeveloped character of the area is retained and the already narrow gap between settlements is not reduced.
Yeah, and obviously then the Sileby Cossington gap is identified at, as letter D in that list.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And so far as the gap is concerned, Mr. Cook's rebuttal at Appendix 3 shows a map of it.
Yeah.
And on page 25 of the PDF file, for those watching on a screen.
Yeah.
And Mr. Cook indicates a measurement, first of all, of 150 metres.
Yes.
And I think that's what he says is the narrowest part of the gap.
That's what I'm taking to be, yeah.
And do you agree that that's the narrowest part of the gap, first of all?
Yeah, looks to be, yeah. And I've
Okay.
measured it, so yeah, happy with that.
But in your view, does the policy we've just been looking at relate to the narrowest part of the gap or to something else?
Yeah, my reading is that it applies to the whole area and that we need to consider if there's a reduction in the gap over the whole area. So, a staggered form, particularly where an area of local separation extends across a road corridor, it's common practice to assess the degree of separation, the gap either side of the road corridor.
Yeah, and has Mr. Cook done that in other gaps that he assesses?
Yeah, I think, yes, if you scroll down to Appendix 5, which is page 29, which is the land off Millstone Lane, Queniborough, area of local separation J, you can see we've got two dimensions picked out on that drawing, 267 metres one side of the road and 161 metres the other side of the road. And I think the same practice is demonstrated on Appendix 6, which is page 31, which is the land of the former Rearsby Roses site. And again, the area separation goes across the Melton Road, and we've got two dimensions picked out, 357 metres on one side and 413 metres.
Okay, well, if we go to Appendix 1 of your proof, I think on page 67,
yeah,
in your LVIA, paragraph 5211 and 5212, have you given the inspector there what you say the gaps are on the different sides of the road?
Yeah, yes, at 5211, yeah, I've discussed how the reduction of the gap would be. I mean, the existing widths are put out in 5.28 west of Cossington Road, east of Cossington Road, and then a dimension from the railway line to the edge of Sileby, sorry, to Cossington.
Yeah.
And then 5.2.11 and 5.2.12. Yeah, I put in a measurement to say how that gap or that distance is reduced as a result of the built form.
Okay, good. Then we now need to look at what's going to be going on in the gap. And have you got core document 2.04, the visualizations?
Yeah, just a bit.
And these accompanied the planning application. The appellants haven't updated them, and we don't criticise them for that, but the inspector just needs to bear that in mind, that there'll be the similar 60 centimetres difference, but I'm sure the inspector will be quite capable of imagining what, say, 10% additional height look like on a building. But the way these work, I think, Mr. Higson, is, and particularly if you're looking them at on a screen, so that if we look at page 1, which is obviously a view from the road looking north. Yeah. If you then run the wheel on your mouse just gently to flick to page 2, you can see what happens when the development's inserted.
Yeah.
One of the advantages of having things on a screen. But if we look then at page 3 first of all, and do the same exercise with between 3 to 4, what does that do to the perception of the gap for the person where the camera is in this photograph?
Yeah, I mean, it obviously introduces built form closer to the viewer. So, you know, that wide expanse of the field and the sort of the distant views of the properties to the east of the road, it is kind of replaced with, yeah, closer properties, breaking the skylines, sort of taller as well. So it brings the entry point to the village close to the viewpoint to the viewer.
Yeah, and then the viewer is obviously continuing to walk north towards Sileby in 5 and 6.
Yeah.
And then on page 11, we start to get a bird's eye view.
Yes, yeah, that's right. And so you can see, in aesthetic terms, the single sort of arable field of the site is simple, open, and smooth. And you can see the sort of the character of the existing built form as well along Shalfront Drive on the left-hand side of the image. So single-storey dwellings with some 2-storey up by the railway line at the top of the image. And then west of Cossington Road, there's a couple of 2-storey dwellings at the gate entry point. But then to the right of the image towards Cossington, there's a collection of 3 single-storey properties, and then Brook Farm Barns is on the opposite side of the road.
Okay, and then page 12 drops in the the illustration of the development. We should note in these visualizations the development to the west of, sorry, to the east of Cossington, the Humble Lane development is not shown, is it? It's
no.
We're going to see it in later visualizations, but just in this one, it's not shown.
Yeah.
And then if we look through, and then scrolling on through page 13 and 14 are other bird's eye views, and then page 15 is a look. Is a look from the barns.
Yep. Yeah, you can see the pinch points there between the barns and the edge of Cossington, you know, either side of the road, and then the expanse of the appeal site extending up the slope on the Rising Valley side. Okay. And again, you can sort of see the single-storey dwellings on the edge currently, and then 2 stories behind. So that sort of common sort of shoulder effect. Character edge to the village where you have lower properties gradually stepping up.
Yeah. And then on page 20, we've got the view from the sort of railway line corner looking back towards Cossington.
Yeah.
And the inspector knows, I think, where the Humble Lane development is, but it's core document 7.05 if he needs reminding. What will the introduction of the Cossington, the Humble Lane development do to the visual perception of the gap between Sileby and Cossington?
But the addition of Humble Lane will be beyond the tree line in the distance. So currently at this elevated part of the village, you've got quite expansive views. You're about 8 metres higher than Brook Farm at this point. So there's wide panoramic views, and Humble Lane development will bring Cossington to the left, I suppose, of the image from where we're looking at this point. And that will obviously mean that the gap is flanked by a broader strip of settlement either side of it.
Yeah. And then, thank you. If you can close that document up for the moment.
Yeah. Could I just on 20? Could I just point out
yes.
the height of the proposed buildings in terms of being 2-storey and the spacing adjacent to the existing settlement edge down Shalfront Drive.
Yeah.
So on page 20, you can see what is effectively quite a dense wall of new development along the backs of those existing residential properties.
Yeah, well, that'll have to be a matter, I think, to be sorted out at reserve matters when the details produced. But that's what's illustrated, and maybe that explains what Mrs. Vanessa Williams was so concerned about the other day. Okay, let's go to now the visualizations, and for that we need the updated ones that are going to become or have become inquiry document 7, replacing Mr. Cook's appendix 4, or superseding Mr. Cook's appendix 4, and we just need to check that we're looking at the ones that have March 2022 written on them rather than February 2022 on the front cover. And these are visualizations that we can see from page 4 of the document, looking at viewpoint locations 10, 9, 7, 6 and 2.
Yeah.
And I think, Mr. Higson, helpfully, those viewpoint numbers are all consistent with the viewpoint numbers that the inspector will have seen before.
Yeah.
Not least on the inspector itinerary document at core document 10.4.
Yeah.
And on this location plan on page 4, we can see that viewpoints 10, 9 and 7 appear on a route on this document which has black diamonds on it, or grey diamonds on it.
Yeah.
And on the core document 10.14 version, I think it's orange dots. Is that right?
Yes, it's labelled as a recreational route, I think.
Yeah, what is that recreational route?
Yeah, so that's the Leicestershire Round, which is a long distance footpath. It's promoted route that goes around Leicestershire, obviously. And yeah, there's a guidebook available, promoted on a website, and I'd imagine would attract visitors to come and see, these parts of the county.
Okay. And then on page 5 of that document is a reminder of the Humble Lane illustrative master plan.
Yeah.
Which we remind ourselves has got a resolution to grant, but not yet a permission because they're still working on the 1A6. And then page, the 6th page, the illustrative master plan of our scheme. And then section 5, page 7, we start to look at the visualizations, or the and the approach is the same from each viewpoint. Here we are at viewpoint 2, the first slide being the existing view.
Yeah.
Showing the camera and all the rest of it, and then the figure 5.1, existing baseline view.
Yeah.
And does that show us how the tolerably well how the ground does in fact rise from the road up towards the skyline?
Yeah, and it's an undeveloped skyline as well. You know, I'd sort of pick out to the right of the settlement edge. Yeah.
And then I think we can just on the extreme right-hand side of the photograph, we can see the half of the gable end of the Dutch barn at the farm. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, the image has been cropped down from the previous panorama. And actually, you know, when you go on site, you know, the experience of crossing the road, or at this point, you're at the end of the public right of way. You know, obviously you can look left or right.
Yeah.
But this is a narrow focus for this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, all of these sorts of resources are aid memoirs for the inspector, in effect, to give him some food for thought before he goes out on his site visit, during his site visit, and when he gets home again. So then the existing baseline view, and then figure 5.2, proposed view at year 1.
Yeah.
And then 5.3, proposed view at year 15.
Yeah.
And in year 15, what's the obscuring effect largely down to?
Well, at 15, yeah, so the hedgerows been allowed to grow up, and we've now got a narrow enclosed road corridor with a breakthrough for the new footpath, and we've got glimpse views of the proposed dwellings still on the skyline as well.
Right. Okay, and then that takes us to then the next set of figures at 6.0 and following, viewpoint 6, and the same sort of approach.
Yes. Yeah.
And at 6.1, the existing baseline view, I think it's possible to pick out the footpath line as it runs across the field.
Yeah. Towards
somebody that looks as though they're walking their dog.
Yeah.
And then at 6.2, we get the view at year 1. And what do you say is the effect on the perception of the gap between Cossington and Sileby?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's quite significant. I think, you know, the previous image shows that the appeal site in its current condition, which is the rising arable field, provides a sense of distance at this location, and the edge of Sileby is distinguishable as well. So you have that break. What the proposals are shown on this visualization are showing is the filling in of that gap, the loss of the field, the loss of that break, and the new dwellings and the new edge of Sileby are actually extending around the back of the barns as well. You can see actually some ridges in between the Dutch barn and the other buildings. So
yes, yeah. I'm again hovering my the wheel on my mouse. So if in figure 6.1 we identify the Dutch barn,
yeah,
and then at the left-hand end of the Dutch barn, there's a bit of skyline before one gets to the trees.
Yeah.
And what happens to that when we look at figure 6.2?
Yeah, that's filled in with peaks, isn't it? Rooftop peaks.
Okay.
Ridges. Which was acknowledged in the LVIA.
Yeah. And then, so that's year 1. What about year 15 on the effect on the view as a whole and the gap?
Yeah, so not much change really. So the landscape planting isn't really altering the addition of the rooftops and the built form at this stage. So I would say not a huge amount of difference. Yeah, the new dwellings are still apparent in the view.
Okay.
And again, the other thing to mention in terms of panorama, if this is a cropped image focusing on towards the appeal site, but anyone who's walking down this route that may actually be looking around will see dwellings at Cossington just to the right of this image.
Okay. And then viewpoint 7.
Yeah.
Which is a bit further away, isn't it, on the footpath network, but still on that side of the map, as it were.
Yeah, this is the Leicestershire round footpath route. The other one was the public right of way.
Yeah. So figure 7.1, we've got viewpoint 7 existing baseline.
Yeah.
And then what do we get in year 1?
Yeah, so very glimpsed views of rooftops. As you say, if you zoom in, it becomes more apparent. Seasonal change, obviously in leaf will, become that will change things as well. I think that was recognised in the LVIA that went in with the application. Again, what I would say is at this location, we've cropped the image. You can see the edge of Cossington just to the right-hand side. And actually, if you rotate round, you can see the Church of All Saints. If you go along this footpath about 10 metres, the view actually opens up towards the appeal site. And so the addition of the dwellings is more like the previous viewpoint 6 visualisation at that point.
Okay. Is that one of your micro sighting points?
It is, yeah.
Yeah. Well, the inspector's got that and will be able to move himself about a bit on the site visit.
Yeah.
These are illustrative viewpoints, as we know. And then at section 8, we go then to the east of the settlement and to the bridge over the railway, first of all.
Yeah.
Which is shown in figure 8.0. And then in figure 8.1, we've got the existing view.
Yes.
And then figure 8.2 is the baseline view, but the Humble Lane development has been included in the baseline view. Is that right?
Yeah, which I think is really helpful. Yeah.
And then we can see the appeal site in green at the gap behind the tree line.
Yes, that's right. So the addition of the Humble Lane dwellings, obviously they're in a dark brown colour, but representation wise, there's a standoff to the railway, but the Cossington village edge has come a lot closer at this viewpoint location. And it's going all the way across to the tree line. And actually there's already, I suppose, a join there just about through that tree line. But the appeal site, that green field is pretty important, even more important, I guess, from this location.
Yes, just to be clear, the Humble Lane development we know is not in the area of local separation, is it?
No, it's not. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And then so if we then go to viewpoint 9, a proposed view at year 1, figure 8.3.
Yeah.
What happens to the perception of separation as a result of that?
Yeah, well, I'd say that we've merged, the settlements have merged as coalescence at this viewpoint location.
Or perceived coalescence.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then does that change at year 15?
I don't think it does really, no, because you've still got the upper parts of the buildings and the rooftops. Again, they're on that sort of rising valley side, so it's quite difficult with planting on the lower ground near the brook to reach the heights.
Yeah. Okay, and then finally viewpoint 10, which is, we know, is a further east along the Leicestershire Round, so walking away from the railway.
Yeah.
Figure 9.1, the existing view. Figure 9.2, the baseline, and again with the Humble Lane site in it.
Yeah.
And then year one, what happens in year one, perceptually?
Yeah, so the Humble Lane is obviously visible on the left-hand side of the view with when that's added in, and then year one we've got the additional dwellings again on that high, because we're on the higher ground. That's extending the perception of Sileby.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then in year 15, what happens?
Yeah, yes, there's planting shown, which is obscuring, I suppose, the facades of the buildings, but the rooftops are still apparent, and there's a subtlety in colour treatment. And
so far as a perception of a gap between Sileby and Cossington,
yeah,
does the planting, what effect does the planting have by year 15 on the perception of the gap between Sileby and Cossington?
So I think the gap's reduced. There's a perception of coalescence at year one isn't as apparent as viewpoint 9. I think the planting is reducing the visibility of the facades and the windows and the other elements. So it probably is, I think, as the LVIA talked about, softening it, but there's still the rooftops and the skyline sort of visibility and the extension of that skyline across it.
Yeah. Good, thank you. Anything else to say about the perception of the gap?
No, can't think of anything.
Good, okay. Now, next, we just need to help the inspector with why that gap's important.
Okay.
And in the landscape statement of common ground at section 6 on page 5, reference is made to a number of documents: the draft Charnwood local plan,
yeah,
the Charnwood Borough Council landscape sensitivity assessment, the borough landscape capacity and sensitivity assessment, the Charnwood landscape sensitivity assessment 2021, and the Green Wedges urban fringe etc. report.
Yeah.
And you make reference to the relevant parts of those in your proof of evidence, which the inspector will have seen and can visit again.
Mm.
But so far as the gap at ALSD is concerned,
yeah,
is there a consistency of approach in those various studies?
Yeah, I think there is. I think it's recognised that it does provide the gap, prevents further ribbon development along Cossington Road. So yeah, I think there is a consistent message across those documents. Okay,
and there seems to be also in them, which is highlighted in, for example, at paragraph 6.4 in the landscape statement of common ground.
Yeah.
Also an assessment of the sensitivity of the site in landscape character terms rather than gap terms.
Yeah.
As a medium to low landscape sensitivity.
Mm.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's how it's described in that report. Yeah.
Okay.
And they mentioned the significant role in retaining the sense of separation between Sileby and Cossington.
Yeah. All right, let's move then away from the gap into character and appearance. And there is a significant issue, I think, between you and Mr. Cook as to whether or not the appeal site is part of a valued landscape for the purposes of NPPF.
Yes.
You say it is, he says it isn't.
Yeah.
What's the nub of the difference between you in your view?
Well, I've followed technical guidance notes 0221, which encourages assessments to consider not just the field or a site if it's a single field, but its context. And it also provides several sort of key factors to consider. And it's slightly expanded to the previous Glivia 3, the 2013 guidance. So there's sort of a new factor introduced that's mentioned. And yeah, so in summary, I think there's a visual connection between the Church of All Saints and the appeal site, particularly around viewpoint 7. I think that the site is key and important to the approach to Sileby. I think it has aesthetic and tranquility qualities emphasised by the level of activity and the urbanised sort of context. So it actually makes it that aspect more important. And that is obviously detailed in my Appendix 1.
Yes, and I think looking at your Appendix 1, there's a series of tables in it.
Yeah.
Where you set out. That is a part. Is there a particular part of your Appendix 1 that you wanted to commend to the inspector?
Yeah, well, so paragraph 3.2.14 is my concise summary based on the tables. And I can read that out. That might be more coherent, or it's.
No, I just wanted to highlight for the inspector.
Yeah.
Where your conclusions are reached, which you've done, 3.2.14.
Yes.
Okay. So now then, the inspector's got the benefit, insofar as he needs it, of your views, Mr. Cook's views, but he's also got the benefit of the Gulbian Luck LVIA that accompanied the planning application.
Mm.
And insofar as impact on the landscape is concerned, at the levels of the Trent Valley Washlands, the Soar Valley LCA, the local setting of the appeal site and the appeal site itself.
Yes.
There's obviously a difference between you and Mr. Cook, but where do Gulby and Luck fall within that spectrum of disagreement?
Yeah, but I think we're quite close, really. I mean, I'd put the Trent Valley Washlands, which is the national character area, a big extensive area, as minor adverse overall. I think the Gulby and Luck LVIA had it as minimal adverse. The Soar Valley landscape character area, which is the Charnwood Borough assessment, I had the effect as minor moderate adverse for the development, and the Gulby and Luck LVIA had it as minor adverse.
And is that is that the level at which Mr. Cook begins to introduce his concept of neutral or beneficial changes?
Yeah, negligible, neutral, or beneficial. Yeah.
Okay. And then what about the local setting of the appeal site itself?
Yeah, so I had that down as major adverse. The Gulby and Luck had it as moderate adverse.
Okay, and then the appeal site itself?
Major adverse, and Gulby and Luck had it as major to moderate adverse.
And what about Mr. Cook?
Moderate, neutral to beneficial.
Okay. So in terms of whether the overall impact is likely to be adverse or neutral to beneficial, where do Gulby and Luck appear to stand in that debate?
They're consistently adverse, but they apply the concept that the landscape planting reduces the severity of the harm.
Okay. And then the other thing that you do at paragraph 3.2.33 in your appendix 1 in your assessment.
Yes.
Which is on page, if you get there before me, you can shout out the page number for the inspector. Yes, page 38, very bottom of page 38.
Yeah.
Is you introduce, well, you don't introduce, but you talk about the cumulative landscape effects on the Soar Valley.
Yes.
What are the cumulative effects you're there referring to?
Yeah, so we recognised early on that the Gulby and Luck LVIA was completed before the Humble Lane decision resolution to grant, and therefore it was appropriate in my reassessment to think about that. Obviously, it's not constructed yet, so we would typically put that in as a cumulative effect, any consented or like, you know, under construction developments. So what I tried to capture or thought about was as those two settlements expand and get closer together, you would have potentially a consequential effect on the key characteristics of the Soar Valley, which lists Sileby and Cossington as separately. There's a comma between them. There's separate settlements. But actually, if we conclude that they coalesce and it's read as a single settlement, then you've got an effect on a key characteristic. So that was really the main thing I was drawing out of that sort of cumulative landscape effect.
Yeah. And then one of the reasons I think Mr. Cook assesses a neutral or beneficial effect is because he has considered the effect of additional planting within the green infrastructure part of the appeals proposal, and has found that to be beneficial.
Yeah.
But what's the characteristic of the landscape of the appeal site at present?
Well, it's a single arable field. It's open. It's smooth. It's simple. And is that characteristic of the character area in which it sits, or is it an outrider of untypical landscape character? Yeah, no, it's mentioned in the Trent Valley Washlands NCA publication, the Soar Valley, that you've got a clear kind of floodplain, which is typically pasture with hedgerows, and then it's contained by rising valley sides, which are typically arable, and there's a visual contrast between scale and colour and pattern. And the appeal site is, typically characteristic as a rising arable field. Okay,
and therefore, in your view, is it beneficial to plant it up?
No.
In landscape character terms?
Not on character terms, no.
Okay. Well, that might be one reason for the difference between you and Mr. Cook. But and then just finally, so far as the difference between you and Mr. Cook are concerned in visual terms, I think the landscape statement of common ground has a helpful schedule at Appendix 2.
Yeah.
Where both you and Mr. Cook look at all of the viewpoints that have been identified as being relevant, and the assessment, in respect of each assessment, both by you, by the appellants, Mr. Cook in his proof, and by the Golby and Luck LVIA, is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
The various assessments and effects are set out so that the inspector has those in a convenient form. But again, if I could just ask you to comment on where the Golby and Luck LVIA fell in within the spectrum of disagreement between you and Mr. Cook.
Yeah, so I think I was a lot closer to the Golby and Luck LVIA in that, you know, had adverse effects across the viewpoints. I think there was, I think viewpoint 8, you can't see the development, so that's, I think I've got none actually from there. Again, the Golby and Luck applies the concept that the landscape planting reduces the degree of adverse effect. I wasn't totally convinced by that on the viewpoints. I didn't feel that at 15 years it was going to, you know, conceal the new rooftops and the loss of undeveloped skyline and those sorts of considerations. So I hadn't sort of downgraded at the 15-year mark the degree of adverse effect. So Mr. Cook has neutral to beneficial across all viewpoints. So there's obviously a clear difference in terms of the nature. I think the other one is possibly in relation to the receptors. So just the sort of the range of receptors at each location. There are other public right-of-way users or recreational users of the road, which I've identified. So there's some differences there, but it's pretty clearly set out.
Okay. All right. Well, Mr. Higson, is there anything else you want to particularly draw to the attention of the inspector as part of your evidence in chief?
No, I mean, obviously I've put my conclusions down in terms of, you know, not protecting the character of the Soar Valley or maintaining the separate identities of Sileby and Cossington. You know, my view is that development would cause the permanent significant harm to the open and undeveloped character of the area of local separation and reduce the already narrow gap.
Fine. Good. Well, sir, that's that's Mr. Higson's evidence in chief, and I think we are within the time estimate given. Yes, we are, which is a good start. Now, so before cross-examination, can I just alert you to one procedural matter that's flashed onto my screen during the course of the evidence in chief? I am told that the laptop with which the councils are in effect running the inquiry, that is telling us that it is going to force a restart for updates at 12 o'clock.
Okay, right.
Now, I don't know, because I've been concentrating on what Mr. Higson has been saying. I don't know whether Mrs. Not on my team or indeed anybody else can stop it doing an update at 12 o'clock noon and tell it to do an update at 12 o'clock midnight instead, or something.
Yes.
So shall we start for half an hour and then draw stumps at 11 o'clock, and then hopefully my learned friend's magical IT skills will be able to sort the situation out behind the scenes. If for some reason there's a restart, as I indicated, sir, it's important that this particular session is recorded and we need to take an early lunch, so be it.
So, yeah, if we need to break at 12, then yes, that.
I'm pretty sure that you can make it do updates before it's planning to. So if we just go through to the normal time, and then have a break, and then we'll try and force the updates during the break.
Okay, well we'll adjourn at 11 and see whether we can sort the IT out.
Yeah.
I did have one question from Mr. Higson, just as a sort of clarification point before turning to cross-examination, which was the when you refer, Mr. Higson, to local setting in your evidence.
Yeah.
Broadly speaking, in geographical terms, what sort of area are you referring to there?
Yeah. So.
And there may be something in your proof that you can just draw me to into the paragraph number, but I just wanted to understand what you meant by local setting.
Yeah, I think I do define it. So it was based on the Golby and Look LVIA as well, because they also kind of categorise landscape in terms of National Character Area, Charnwood Borough Council's Character Area, the Soar Valley, the local setting, and the site itself. Mm-hmm. And I was comfortable with sort of following that approach. So if you look at table SH9 on page 31
of your proof,
my appendix, yeah. So I've got in there the local setting of the appeal site, including the site, the land associated with the wider AOLS, land to the immediate south of the local watercourse and to the east of the railway line. And I believe that's the same phrase that the Golby and Look used.
Yeah.
And broadly speaking, it's the representative viewpoints as well.
Okay. So most of those have a sort of defined boundary, but east of the railway line, obviously, it must peter out at some point.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think by the time you get up to viewpoint 11, that's probably beyond the local setting.
Okay.
And yeah, peters out fairly close, really, east of the railway line. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think that was the main query. Actually, was the east of the railway line where that sort of stopped being part of the local setting. I think you've clarified that, so thank you.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's the barrier. It's on opposite an embankment to the southeast, and then the natural topography and the railway line join in the northeast.
Okay. Yes. Fine. Thank you. That's helpful. Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Tucker, when you're ready, if you'd like to start cross-examination, and then obviously, hopefully, we can find a suitable place to break for adjournment at 11.
By all means, thank you, sir. Good morning, Mr. Higson.
Morning,
Mr. Higson. Just on that last point that the inspector raised, I was going to set you two pieces of homework before Mr. Cook gives evidence. One of which was to tell me exactly what you mean by local setting. I don't know if it's possible to put on even in a broad swathe on an OS base so that we know what you're talking about, if that would be helpful.
Yeah, I'm talking about the same as the Golby and Look LVIA. Well, yeah, I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, okay, that's helpful. Thank you very much. And then the second point is on pages 66 and 67, where you give distances. When a landscape architect gives distances, I immediately go to a map to find out whereabouts he's drawn them on a plan. And I couldn't find a plan. Have I missed it, or is that a second piece of homework that I would like you to do before Mr. Cook gives evidence?
Yeah, I can certainly provide a drawing with that marked up. Yeah.
Excellent. That's fantastic. Going back to the first question, then, the local area, page 31, includes land associated with the AOLS, well, we know what that is, and then land to the immediate south of the local watercourse. That then takes into Humble Lane territory, doesn't it?
Sorry, could you repeat? I was just writing down the
by all means, sorry.
Questions.
So in relation to the land to the immediate south of the watercourse, that takes us into land which is part of the Humble Lane resolution to grant. Is that right?
Yeah, because the appeal site and the Humble Lane site have the same site boundary along the watercourse. Yeah. So yes, inevitably that will form part of it.
Thank you. And if you go back to page 29 of your proof of your, I'm going to call it a proof repeatedly, I'm afraid, notwithstanding it's appendix 1. But page 29, you assessed the landscape value of the local setting, and one of the reasons why you think that the appeal site is a valued landscape is because of its relationship to the valued landscape around. So do I take it that you think the local landscape setting of the appeal site is also a valued landscape?
Yeah, I think the appeal site forms part of a valued landscape. Yeah.
Yeah, and that valued landscape includes the local setting, which is the area we just talked about. Yeah.
Yep.
Right. Good. Could you take up, please, core document, and forgive me, this is a point which has arisen from your evidence in chief. Otherwise, I was going to stick to my learner friends list. But core document 7.01, which is the committee report on Humble Lane.
Yeah.
Okay, I can't find it. I don't recall reading it, and I've done a word search to double check this morning during your evidence in chief. But the council doesn't treat the Humble Lane site as being valued landscape, does it?
Without doing a word search myself, I wouldn't be able to answer that.
On your judgment, that's an omission, isn't it?
Sorry?
On your evidence, that's an omission, isn't it?
What, for the council not to judge?
Yeah, you say that Humble Lane is part of a valued landscape. They don't even address the issue in the report to committee. That's an omission on your evidence, isn't it?
No, I'm saying land within the local setting of the appeal site.
Which includes the Humble Lane site you just told me.
Well, it not necessarily all of it, no, part of it.
Okay, well, let's even dance with that point if you want, Mr. Higson. The fact that part of the Humble Lane site, which is being developed, is valued landscape, in your judgment, has policy implications. Therefore, that's an omission on your evidence in terms of the approach that's been taken to Humble Lane, isn't it?
Well, I say I haven't read their report.
Okay, well, if I'm right and the inspector can check behind the scenes, or my learner friend can re-examine you if there's a big section on it which deals with valued landscape. But if I'm right that it doesn't, that's an omission because it has policy implications in relation to whether that site should have been resolved to be granted permission. And the reason why it's relevant, Mr. Higson, is because the council haven't yet issued a decision on that case. And if there's a material consideration that the council needs to take into account, they can take it back to committee and report it back. On your evidence, that there is a material omission in that report, isn't there? If I'm right.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting point. I certainly have to think about it.
Well, unfortunately, when it comes to cross-examination, your thinking is whilst answering my questions.
Yeah. Well, I suppose I'm thinking about the idea of the local setting of the appeal site and what are those attributes that elevate it above the more everyday landscape. Is it the Humble Lane area south of the watercourse, or is it the area of local separation as it extends west around the Church of All Saints? And to be honest with you, I think as I've set out in table SH7, those are the bits that are the more important attributes and contributing factors.
Yeah, and you told me that's at least part of the Humble Lane site. We said that a few minutes ago, and I don't want to dance around this point, Mr. Higson. It's a material omission from the officer's report on the Humble Lane site, if you're right, or the officers take a different view. You can't have it both ways, can you?
Yeah, maybe the officers took a different view. That's a good point. I mean, you know, if we look at the date of the decision, 22nd of December 2020, is that correct?
The resolution to grant?
I think it's 2021.
Certainly it's 21 when you were instructed on this site.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, come back to that. Let me put a different point in relation to Humble Lane to you.
Yeah.
One of the issues in relation to Humble Lane is the extent to which the effect of the grant of permission on Humble Lane influences the outcome of this case because it influences whether or not there is a difference in terms of the issue of separation between the two settlements. I'll put it as neutrally as I possibly can. Can you turn it? I don't know if you've got the PDF open of core document 7.1.
7.1. Yeah, sorry, I had it open then. Yeah.
Good. And partway down that page, you should have a paragraph, third paragraph, which starts the indicative development framework. Do you have that?
Sorry, say that again.
Partway down that page, you should have a sentence which starts the paragraph which starts the indicative development framework. Do you have that?
No.
Could we have the page number?
15 of 41.
Brilliant, thanks.
On the PDF.
Yeah, got that.
Good. And the reason why this paragraph is important is because this appears to be the only bit which discusses the issue of gap and separation. So it talks about the indicative development framework plan, and then the last sentence of that paragraph says the location of the site to the east of the village would maintain the existing separation from the adjoining settlement of Sileby, with the overall width of the gap between the villages would not be reduced.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you agree with that?
So I think I analysed this in my proof. 5.29. So I say the resolution to grant planning permission for development of land off Humble Lane will result in this settlement expanding in size. Consequentially, an extension to the limits of development will need to be determined. Detailed designs are not available at present, but I do not anticipate that the physical width of ALSD will be affected as a result of this additional area of housing.
Yeah, but that sentence goes further because it's not talking about the AOLS. It's not in it, as you rightly pointed out. It's talking about whether or not there will be an effect in terms of the separation of the settlements, i.e. a judgment. And I'll point to why that's relevant on the evidence you put that the council put forward in any event in a moment. But the judgment formed by the officers is no effect on gap. You see? And I'm asking you whether you agree with the judgment that the officers have formed, not whether it's in the AOLS or not. Do you agree or not?
Yeah, so my second bullet point, I say, however, the larger settlement of Cossington will result in a reduction in open countryside and more enclosure to the immediate south of the ALS. But I would say that's the same as the settlement at Sileby.
So I don't understand that to be an answer to my question. Do you agree or disagree with the officer's assessment that there's nil effect in terms of the gap? The overall width of the gap between the villages wouldn't be reduced. Maintain separation from the adjoining settlement of Sileby. So nil effect. Do you agree with that or not?
No, I think it will reduce.
You think it will be reduced? So a second point where officers might want to have to take this application back then, or that officers have taken a different view to you in relation to matters. Those are the only two conclusions, yeah? Do you agree?
Yeah.
Right, well, if you go to, again, arising from what you told my learned friend in chief, core document 6.08, which is the capacity study, not the addendum study.
Yeah.
So is that's 6.08?
6.08, sir.
Thank you.
And on page 57 of the PDF, when you've got that, we've got the discussion of this particular site, which is described as PSH 260.
Sorry, which particular site?
The Humble Lane site, the one we're talking about.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
260.
Yeah.
And I'm going to contrast this in just a moment with the appeal site. So under form density identity and setting of existing settlement stroke development. So the primary issue that's between us, that site is said to the area provides a level of separation from the nearby town, Sileby, part of which is visible in the distance from this site.
Yeah.
Area feels connected to the existing area of Cossington, etc. And then if you look on the right-hand column, we've got a rating, which is medium to high. See that?
Yeah.
So the background work from LUC to the emerging development plan assesses that the sensitivity to that aspect, i.e. identity of settlement of this site, because of its role in separation, is medium to high, yeah?
Yep.
Okay, bear in mind the nil assessment. Now let's just contrast that with the appeal site, please, which you have. This is an addendum because for some reason the appeal site wasn't assessed in 6.08. It's assessed in 6.09. If you could just take that up, please.
Yeah.
And it's site PSH 474, page 100 out of 147 on the PDF.
Yeah.
And if you look form density, identity and setting of existing settlement stroke development.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see what's said there in relation to this site, which we know is in the AOLS.
Yeah.
Third bullet point.
Yeah.
The site plays a significant role in retaining the sense of separation between Sileby and Cossington directly to the south. However, mature trees south of the site screens into visibility between the site and the settlement of Cossington, and it doesn't get a medium high, unlike Humble Lane. It gets a medium. Do you see that?
Yes, I can see that. Yeah.
So this seems to be suggesting, in fact, Humble Lane is more sensitive in relation to putting those two pieces of work together with regard to the issue of settlement identity than the appeal site. And the reason why that is because of the mature trees to the south of the site. Now, firstly, do you agree with that in terms of the appeal site?
I must admit, I looked at the rating on this one and I was a bit concerned about how the authors had applied the grading. So I think if we look at page 6 and the definition of form density and identity.
Well, I don't mind you qualifying, but would you answer my direct question directly, please, before we do? A point the inspector said on day one, you'll recall, Mr. Higson. Do you agree with the assessment that the authors have put forward?
I agree with the assessment. I don't agree with the rating.
So you agree that mature trees south of the site screens into visibility between the site and the settlement edge of Cossington then?
Yes, the existing
Good.
one. Yeah. I mean, there was a viewpoint in the Goldby Look LVIA off the Pegs Lane public right of way. So we could have a look at that viewpoint.
You can qualify in whatever way you see fit if you're answering direct questions directly, Mr. Higson.
Yeah, so viewpoint 5. So I don't know if we've got the Goldby and Look LVIA to hand.
Yeah, viewpoint 5.
So views of the site are heavily filtered by intervening tree cover and set in the backdrop of Glyn's views towards the southern settlement edge of Sileby.
Yeah, and just to remind ourselves, viewpoint 5 is on the east side of the existing built form of Cossington, isn't it?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. So we're looking at the intervening mature hedgerows that both you and LUC consider screens into visibility between the site and the settlement edge of Cossington. You're demonstrating that's the case by that photograph, are you?
Yeah.
Yeah, good, thank you. So let's just go back and think about the Humble Lane report. The Humble Lane report, which is core document 7.01. And let's try and work out what the officer's saying. back to page 15, by saying nil effect in terms of area separation in relation to a site which LUC says is actually more sensitive when it comes to the sense of separation. Either officers are incompetent, or officers have taken an informed view based upon the information before them, which would include the LUC report, and have thought, do you know what? We think that the overall effect of this development is neutral, notwithstanding that sensitivity. Now, which are you suggesting? That we should read this as an informed view of officers, or we should infer that officers aren't doing the job properly and need to send this back to members quickly?
I think they'd be judging it based on the LVIA that accompanied the Humboldt Lane application.
Yeah. But they're currently going through the process of the LUC, of the local plan. I don't know whether the LVIA referenced the LUC report. But if we draw the not unreasonable inference that the officers were aware of the LUC report, or the LVIA referenced it, this is a conclusion of nil effect, notwithstanding the conclusions of LUC on a more sensitive site in terms of separation between the two settlements. Agreed?
No.
So you're inferring incompetence then?
And no, I don't think the sensitivity and capacity study is effectively superseded by an LVIA. I think that's commonly accepted practice. So I think we'd have to look at what the LVIA said for the Humboldt Lane.
Sorry, so in terms of this case, are you inviting the inspector to have regard to the LUC report, as I thought was agreed in the statement of common ground for the landscape issues?
Yeah, well, it provides the evidence base and the background.
And the inspector can therefore infer that on a site which the council has resolved to grant, notwithstanding this issue about valued landscape, on a site which the council has resolved to grant, which on the LUC report appears to be more sensitive in terms of identity of the settlement, that officers have nonetheless thought nil effect in terms of gap.
Well, I said to you a moment ago,
is that a fair conclusion in terms of what we infer from the background, even if you disagree with that conclusion?
I disagree with the rating and sensitivity of the appeal site. So
yeah,
and I did say that to you. So I think that.
No, you did.
I'm happy to explain where I think the appeal site was under rated in terms of sensitivity in the LUC report.
By all means, if you want to, and my learned friend can take you back to that in terms of points in re-examination. If you want to take the inspector to something to respond to my previous question, given the obvious issues that you have with this report, I'm happy that you do so, Mr. Higson. What do you want to tell the inspector before I ask my next question?
Yeah, okay. So, yeah, page 100 of that report talked about the significant role in the settlement. Whereas if you turn to page 6 and look at the criteria, it says in order to be high sensitivity, the area needs to play an important part in the protection of the gap between settlements. So I would apply significant and important and come up with a high grading for that category.
And just so we're aware in relation to that, that's PDF page 9 of core document 6.09.
Yeah. And I think I would also have a look at views and visual character, including skylines. So the appeal site is described as the landscape is open, high degree of intervisibility with existing settlement in Sileby. And again, if we look at the LUC page 7, what is a high sensitivity site with that? Well, the area is open and or has a high degree of visibility from surrounding landscapes.
Well, let's just deal with these points one at a time then, since you want to go there. Page 6 of the hard copy, page 9 of the PDF of core document 6.09.
Page 7.
Page 6 of, I want to deal with points in turn before you move away from move to a different point. You would put the appeal site in the high sensitivity of the form density identity setting of category. Is that right?
Yeah, I think using the author's description that the site plays a significant role in retaining the sense of separation. Yeah.
But the inspector should note that the author didn't do that. The author puts it in the medium sensitivity.
Yeah.
Some contribution to setting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll come in due course to see how that's consistent with the ARAP report as well.
Okay.
Page 7, you're also saying that LUC have got it wrong in terms of views, and that they should have put it in the high sensitivity, whereas they put it in the moderate sensitivity point. Is that your point?
Yeah, I think the way in which they described it, and then the way in which the criteria in the ratings, it didn't tally up. So they had it as moderate. I think the way in which they described it, it sounds like it's high.
Now, if you go back to the additional document that was submitted, the new visualizations, which my learner friend carefully took you through, and if you can go to viewpoint number 7 of that, please.
Yeah.
Not viewpoint 7, sorry, viewpoint 9. Not read my own writing. And page 19 shows the existing position, as the inspector will no doubt stand on the railway bridge, just down for the attractive graffiti, and look over this area. And then we've got page 21 shows the Humble Lane site. Do you have that?
Yeah.
And you said, when my learner friend first took you there, with the Humble Lane site built, there's already a join there. And then my learner friend took you to perception. So just to understand what you're saying there, because this is showing the baseline position.
Yeah.
So with the appeal site undeveloped, what you're saying, I think, by saying there's already a join there, is that there is an overlap that you can see there in the winter between built development in Sileby and built development as it will be in Cossington. Is that the point?
Yeah, I think, yes, that's correct. Yeah.
So with the Humble Lane site, there will be a perception of coalescence from this viewpoint. Yeah. Irrespective of this appeal.
Well, it's staggered, isn't it? And I suppose the vegetation around that part of Derry's nurseries is denser. It's the dwellings along Cossington Road are at a lower level at that point, so you've got vegetation from the Soar Valley behind.
Yeah, I'm just using your words, Mr. Higson. With Humble Lane, there's already a join there. So your case is that the baseline position is with Humble Lane, there is already perceptual coalescence from this viewpoint. Is that right?
Yeah.
I mean, don't get me wrong. You're wrong about that, because our case is that same mature that same mature tree line we can see there. Insofar as it has an effect southwards, it also has an effect northwards as well. So we take a very different view in relation to that, as to whether there's perception of joining, and you see it in 3 dimensions. But so the baseline position against which you are joining effects in terms of viewpoint 9 then are degrees of coalescence rather than actual where there would be perceptual coalescence. Is that your baseline compared to the future?
Yes, yeah, it's degrees of coalescence, correct, yeah.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you very much. Right. Just picking up a few miscellaneous points from your examination in chief before we break at 11 o'clock, just to get them out of the way. Viewpoint 6, once we've got that. Viewpoint 6.
Yeah.
And if you can just turn to page 11 of 28. Page 11 of 28. We can see the from the bottom of that page, the path that one is walking along towards Sileby, can't we?
Yes.
And as you rightly say, if I'm doing a recreational route like the chap with his dog, I'm looking all around me. I've got 120 degrees of view, and I will have seen some of Cossington. I will have seen some of Sileby as I'm walking. I'll have seen fields between, etc. So this is not a viewpoint. This is illustrative of a kinetic view, I think, is your point. But I just want to understand your point that you made to my learner friend, because you talked about filling the gap when we looked at page 13. So filling the gap, page 13.
Yeah.
This is a view directly to the northeast, isn't it? There or thereabouts.
Yeah.
the buildings which we can see on page 13 are all in Sileby, aren't they?
The cropped image that we have in this direction are all in Sileby if we consider the Brook Farm Barns is part of Sileby.
Yeah, well, it's slightly further north of the sign that says, well, welcome to Sileby, or Sileby, isn't it? Are you saying Brook Barn Farm isn't in Sileby?
It's not in the limits to development on the mapping that I've seen.
Didn't ask that question. Are you saying it's in Sileby? It's immediately adjacent to a sign that says Sileby. Are you saying Brook Barn Farm isn't in Sileby? This is a credibility point, Mr. Higson.
No, well, it's a barn with a farmhouse, and it's 30 metres away from the ribbon development that extends along the west side of Cossington, Sileby. So no, I think it's beyond there. I mean, you know, are we talking about postcodes or people's perceptions, the residents?
We're talking perceptions. I just want to know your approach. I don't mind your answer, to be blunt, Mr. Higson. Is it in Sileby? Are you at Sileby when you reach the sign that says Sileby? Because we're talking about perceptual issues here.
Yeah, God, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because perceptually, it's a big collection of buildings, and it's the east side of the road, and yeah, you go past the sign. You've got the ribbon development on the west side on the left. Yeah, it's. I mean, actually, the field, obviously, the appeal site extends up, so that gives us that clear separation. So now I would probably say it isn't from that point of view.
Not in Sileby. Okay, that's helpful. So you're not in Sileby by the time you pass that sign. That's fine. There's ribbon development 30 metres to the left as you're continuing up, as you've just pointed out.
Yeah.
When you get to that ribbon development, walking from Cossington to Sileby, are you in Sileby?
So I think I think as I put in my proof, I talk about the sort of the entry point to Sileby, which is really where the Chalfont Drive properties join.
Right. Okay. So I'm not in Sileby then. I've walked past half a dozen properties now, and I'm now about to walk alongside Chalfont Drive, but I haven't quite reached Chalfont Drive, but I'm adjacent to the undeveloped northern part of the appeal site.
Yeah.
Am I in Sileby net at that point?
I think that's the entry point. Yeah.
Right. Okay. That's helpful. So your assessment in terms of a degradation of the gap is based upon your assessment that you don't get to Sileby until you've passed the farm, until you've passed the ribbon development, and until you are immediately adjacent to Chalfont Drive. That's your assessment, is it?
Well, I think it's a staggered form. I think that's recognised.
Yeah.
So there's obviously the western side.
Let's just be a bit more brutal about this, Mr. Higson. If you're dealing with gap cases and perception of gaps, you need to have a sense of leaving one place, being not in that place, and then a sense of arrival at another place. And that's part of the assessment as to whether there's a gap between places. Innumerable appeal decisions have talked about that. In terms of the sense of leaving Cossington and arriving at Sileby, your judgment is the inspector passes the Cossington sign, 150 metres behind the Sileby sign, passes the Sileby sign, passes the Brookbank Farm, passes the ribbon development, and he doesn't feel that he's in Sileby until he actually gets alongside Chalfont Road. Is that how you want the inspector to judge your assessment of what that current gap is, Mr. Higson?
Yeah, I think it's a staggered form as you described, and the entry point, the clear entry point, is just next to Chalfont Drive. Okay,
well, let's see if we can take this even further. In terms of the appeal proposals, if the appeal proposals come forward, that will bring that point of entry, what, 80 metres further south, I think you say?
Yeah, it was a 60, 80, yeah.
So let's just have a look at your evidence, just so I have that. It's your page 67. I think, is it your 5.2.12 that I should be looking at?
Well, all three of those paragraphs, 5.2, 10, 11 and 12, discuss the reduction of the actual gap.
Yeah. But 5.10 says it's 60 metres further down. So you're bringing the entry point 60 metres close to Cossington then on your evidence, are you?
Yeah, along the roadside, 160 along the railway line.
Okay, well, let's just pursue this a little further. I'll transgress a minute or so into the break if I may. So I'm bringing the entry point to Sileby 60 metres further to the south.
Yeah.
But there would still be a gap. Now, because I don't have a plan, I'm not entirely sure what that gap would be. At what point do I leave Cossington? When I pass the sign at Cossington at the bend in the road, or at some other point? Where do I leave Cossington? Because I'm not interested in limits of development. People don't perceive limits of development. I want to understand the perception of the gap. What point do I leave Cossington?
I think you will leave Cossington or leave Sileby.
Leave Cossington. So I'm leaving Cossington now. So I want to know how long it is the gap once the appeal's been allowed, or how long it is at the moment in terms of my perception of leaving Cossington before I arrive at Sileby. Where is the leaving point of Cossington that you've assessed?
Okay. So I suppose that's the crux of the issue, isn't it? Because the addition of the development and the open space and Brook Farm Barns in combination blur that distinction on that side. Yeah, leaving Cossington, we're sort of going round past the nurseries up to the barns. I think it'd be quite difficult to, without the signage, it'd be quite difficult to determine it.
Well, there is a perceptual gap. You tell us. You have perceived that gap. You've measured it to the limits of development. There is a sign, if you go southbound, where you see a sign saying Cossington, close to the nurseries.
Mm.
Is the point at which you perceive you've left Cossington at that sign, north of that sign, south of that sign? Feel like Nicky Campbell now.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point at which you leave Cossington perceptually isn't going to change. It's the bringing forwards of Sileby.
No, I know that, but where do I leave Cossington on your assessment? You've told me that I'm going to arrive at Sileby 60 metres early. I've got that. That's helpful. Thank you. That's great. South of that, well, I've still got a gap. But what I don't understand is, in terms of your assessment of how long it's been since I've left Cossington, at the moment, I don't know where I've left Cossington. And I'm using the sign just simply as a reference point, so you can tell me if it's further north, further south, or what. Or maybe I never leave Cossington. Maybe it's like Hotel California.
Yeah. So I haven't got the dwelling number, but it's the dwelling opposite Derry's Nurseries entrance.
Okay.
I mean, I think that would still be the end of the historic dwellings in Cossington.
Okay, so it's the dwellings on the end of Derry's Nursery is the point at which I will perceive that I'm leaving Cossington. Then I will have a gap, and then I will have development which is 60 metres further south than Chalfont Drive at the moment. That's your case, is it? No,
that gap is not obvious enough. But I mean, obviously you've asked me at what point are we leaving Cossington, so by implication at what point are we entering Sileby? Yeah. I think what I'm saying, it's the combination of elements in between will reduce the perception. It's going to be quite difficult because it's quite short distances and short time scale.
Right, it is at the moment. If you're driving it, it's relatively short. If you're walking it, you do see those differential elements. You see the high trees immediately adjacent to the brook. You see Brookbank Farm. You see the ribbon development. You see the nursery. If you look on plan, you can see the nursery is certainly not an open land use. But at the moment, you're telling me there is a perceptible gap which requires protection by refusing consent, or rather, your planner is telling me it should be refused consent. All I'm trying to understand is, at the moment, there is a leaving point and an arrival point. You've told me how the arrival point is going to change. The leaving point won't change at all. I just want to be able to identify where it is. So can I take a note of your evidence that it's the property opposite Derry's farm, beyond which there is a perceptual gap, but because of development within that gap, it's perhaps a little more messy than simply a straightforward line of development than some fields. Is that the point?
Yes, I think messy is a very good way of describing that band of land between the end of Sileby and Cossington, because it isn't really clear. But what the appeal site does, it's a clear sweep against the ribbon development.
Okay, I see. So it's the backdrop to the messiness of Brookbank Farm that we're really arguing about, is it?
Yeah, maybe messy isn't a very good word in that context. It's the combination of those elements that provide enclosure.
I see. Right. Well, I've transgressed. Sorry.
The contrast with the appeal site, which doesn't have enclosure and is open.
Okay. Well, we'll come back to that after the break. So I've transgressed on the mid-morning adjournment too far, I think. Thank you, Mr. Higson.
Thank you, Mr. Tucker. And yes, we'll have a break now. Mr. Higson, obviously, as you know, you're already not in contact, but you can't contact anybody from your team during the adjournment whilst during cross-examination. Thank you. So we'll adjourn. And yes, Mr. Richards. Could
I just invite Mrs. Knott to tell you, because I'm now more confused about what's going on with the IT than I was at the start.
Okay.
So would you hear from Mrs. Knott? Who I hope will tell us what is going to happen when we're away and what we need to do to get back together again.
Okay. Hi, Ms. Knott.
Hi, sorry about this. There's an update that the laptop that's streaming YouTube is forcing us to do before 12. Unfortunately, we need to stop the stream because the laptop will restart and we can't restart the stream. So there needs to be a second YouTube stream. Now, what we've done is we've put in the description of the YouTube that's currently streaming now. The link to part 2 is what we're calling it. So when the inquiry starts again, there will be a new stream for part 2 of this session today. The link, as I said, will be on the description to this video. But if anyone struggles, I do have a copy of it and I can send that to the appellants in the break. So it's clear as to what YouTube stream we are using. But we will be back and the inquiry can happen. It'll just be on a slightly different YouTube stream.
Okay. Thank you. So is the update going to happen now during the break? Is that the most sensible time to do it? Yes. So how long do you think you might need for that update?
It should only be half an hour. We're not sure why this has happened and we can't get IT to change it. But we're assuming that it'll take about 10 minutes for the update and the restart, and then we can get the stream up and running. If there are any issues, I will let Mr. Richards know. But the Teams meeting will be unaffected, so we can communicate through that. It's just the streams that it will affect.
Fine. So it sounds like hopefully we won't need to stop at 12. Then we can come back and carry on.
Correct.
After that. Yeah, brilliant. Okay. Well, shall we say break until 11:40? So just over half an hour, just to allow, just in case of any gremlins in the system.
Thank you, sir.
And so I think there may be some sense in making sure that there is a separate copy of today's proceedings in any event that's sent to my team. So I'm very grateful to Ms. Knott for that observation.
Great. Thank you all. Anything else before we adjourn? Okay, thank you then. We'll adjourn till 11:40. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Higson.